Today, we're going to start with The Trouble with Taxes, 1764 to 1770, on page 18 of George versus George. And we're going to read all the way through page 22. If you have your book, please follow along. So what stirred up the hornet's nest in the first place? It all began over money and over the rights of citizens, too. Great Britain had been in one war or another for 50 years and was drowning in debt. Over in London, Parliament decided that Americans should help out by paying their fair share, and King George agreed. After all, Great Britain had spent plenty of money fighting in America for the good of the colonies. The Crown was still supporting a British army to help stop Indian attacks on the American frontier. It was Great Britain's right to collect payment. To raise the money, Parliament passed a Sugar Act and a Stamp Act saying that colonists had to pay taxes to Great Britain for all sorts of imported goods, from molasses, blue indigo dye, and pimentos to printed items such as marriage licenses, playing cards, and newspapers. Similar taxes were often collected in England, but the colonists were already paying separate taxes to cover their own war debts and to run the colonies. A lot of them thought paying twice wasn't one bit fair. Besides, they believed it was against the British Constitution. Ever since the Middle Ages, English law had said that there should be no taxation without representation. This meant that citizens could never be taxed unless their elected representatives voted to pay. The colonists were British citizens, and the law guaranteed them the rights of Englishmen. So, where was their right to have representatives who could vote for or against these taxes? Though many colonists would stay loyal to the crown and obey its laws no matter what, others argued that Parliament might make them pay even more taxes without their consent. Many colonial merchants refused to buy British goods. Pamphlet writers roared. Preachers thundered from their pulpits. Angry members of an organization called the Sons of Liberty stripped royal office holders and covered them with hot tar and goose feathers. They used to tar and feather folks in Great Britain too in those days. A mob completely wrecked the home of the royal governor of Massachusetts. A straw dummy dressed to look like a stamp distributor was hung from a 120-year-old elm tree, and the British tax stamps that Americans were supposed to buy were burned in every colony. By the time the Stamp Act was supposed to go into effect in November of 1765, flags were being flown at half-mast to mourn the death of liberty. Nobody in America would even distribute the stamps. 4 months later, hoping to restore peace, Parliament finally gave up and got rid of the hated taxes. This troubled King George, who still thought the taxes were fair, but he signed the repeal anyway. British merchants were delighted to get their lost customers back, and all of America celebrated. Well, the story could have ended right there, but of course it didn't. To show they weren't afraid to tax the colonies, Parliament started demanding even more taxes. Patriot leaders in Massachusetts and Virginia made polite protests to the king, but politeness didn't help one bit. King George believed that God gave noblemen the divine right to rule and that the colonists had a duty to obey. The British stubbornly informed legislatures in both colonies that they couldn't have any more meetings, so the colonists stopped trying to be polite. The Virginians, including George Washington, met anyway and banned the sale of all items taxed by Great Britain. Colonists smuggled in untaxed goods from other countries, which was illegal, and they made lots of their own goods instead of buying British ones. A women's group called the Daughters of Liberty supported the cause by weaving their own cloth, making their own ball gowns, and brewing their own Liberty tea out of sassafras flowers. King George was sure that certain gentlemen who pretend to be patriots in Massachusetts were no more than criminals, so he sent a fleet of warships to Boston to make them behave. 700 soldiers wearing fancy uniforms soon paraded up Boston streets with muskets on their shoulders. Whenever they were off duty, many stole, and chased women. Some also infuriated worshippers by purposely racing horses, beating drums, and even doing things they shouldn't underneath church windows on Sundays. In March of 1770, an angry mob of American rowdies started taunting 8 of King George's soldiers and pelting them with icy snowballs. Then someone threw a lump of wood at a redcoat and knocked him flat. The enraged troops began firing into the crowd, and 5 colonists were killed. Furious Sons of Liberty were quick to label the disaster the Boston Massacre, and it stirred up plenty of anger on both sides.